Starting off at number 10 now, we have the serial killer. Yes, we are starting off with a very intense one right away. This one comes from Reddit user Archimedes, who said, "We had a serial killer in South Carolina a couple of years ago. No one knew what he looked like yet, but he had already killed 3 people at this point. Well, my granny has lived alone since my granddad passed about 15 years ago. She lived at the end of a long dirt road with about 10 other families, but the closest one was about a quarter of a mile up the road. One afternoon, some random guy comes knocking on the front door of her house. My granny is a practical woman. She has never been to school because she grew up on a farm and was expected to pull her weight, but she is a smart woman. She goes to her glass front door but doesn't open it. The 40-ish-year-old man is there asking if he can use a phone since his car broke down. Granny doesn't like the look of this guy. He doesn't live here. If he doesn't live here, there is no reason for him to be on this road, and if he was visiting someone, their house or anyone else's house would have been closer since she lives on a dead end. Anyway, she tells him that no, he can't use the phone and he needs to leave. She backs up and picks up my granddad's 410 as she goes. Once he sees the shotgun, he hightails it out of there. About a week later, the cops finally catch the serial killer, and lo and behold, it isn't the same damn man."
In our 9th spot, we have the cute guy. And if you guys are liking this video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up because it really helps us out. So this story was shared by user Vodka Sunshine. She claims that there was a really cute guy in one of her college classes. About 2 weeks in, they got paired together for a group project, and she was excited to get to know him. But after being near him, she got this bad vibe from him, but she didn't know why. Anyways, a month or 2 later, the same guy had been arrested after killing the girl he had been dating, who was another student at the school. It's a pretty good thing she listened to her gut. She may have been the victim instead of the other girl. Moving on, at number 8, we have the daycare. So this woman was trying to decide on what daycare was best for her child. She visited one place which was affordable, but you paid for the full week even if your kid missed a day. The other place was more expensive, but you only paid for the days that you attended. Even though it was way more expensive, she decided to go with the second daycare. She claims that she got this bad vibe from the other, and it was a good thing that she avoided it. Within 2 weeks, the daycare caught on fire under weird circumstances. Now thankfully no one got hurt, but still, that's a frightening thing for anyone to experience, especially a little one. In our 7th spot, we have the drugs. This next guy, let's call him Steven, was between jobs one summer, so he picked up a job as being a spot welder. He was responsible for welding giant custom steel truck bumpers together. But weeks into the job, he felt kind of sketchy about it all. I mean, one of the guys was always smoking weed on the job, and another guy was always yelling on the phone to his wife. He was just getting bad vibes from it all, so he decided to stop showing up. And the very day he didn't show up, the place was raided by police. Apparently, they were making counterfeit bumpers. Not only that, but police found a bunch of drugs on site. Everyone who was in that day got arrested. If Steven went in that day, he too would have landed up behind bars. And good luck trying to convince the police that you didn't know the shady stuff that was happening at the place you work for. This dude literally avoided jail time and a fine. Coming in at number 6, we have the babysitting job. This story was shared by Lucas Cedor. According to him, when his mom was young, she was a babysitter for one family. One night she was supposed to go over and babysit their kid, but she got this bad feeling. She didn't know why or what it was, but she called them and canceled on them. The family pleaded with her, saying that it was only for a few hours. But she listened to her gut and didn't go. So they ended up finding a last-minute babysitter to replace her. That night, their house was broken into and the babysitter was attacked. If she had gone that night, she would have been the one who got attacked. Isn't that so freaky? Like, how did her body know something bad was going to happen? We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the tree. When this next guy, I'm gonna call him John, when John was younger, his dad took him and his sister to the toy store to pick out one toy. He had been saving up his allowance and finally got the lightsaber he wanted. On their drive home, it started to storm and it got pretty rainy and windy. They arrived home safely and his dad and sister got out of the car and ran into the house. But John was too excited about his toy. He was busy playing with it in the backseat of the car. That's when all of a sudden he felt this overwhelming urge to get out of the car and go into the house. His body was telling him to get inside now. So he listened and ran inside. As soon as he did this, the big maple tree in the front yard fell over and crashed down on the car. It had crushed the back seat of the car where he had just been sitting. If he didn't go inside when his body told him to, he would have been crushed to death. Moving on at number 4, we have Grandma Saves the Day. Reddit user Fatanto shared the story of how his grandmother saved his aunt's life. So this happened back in the 80s. Grandma was inside vacuuming when she felt this bad feeling that his aunt, her daughter, was in danger. Her daughter was outside in the front playing on the driveway. She ran outside, and just as she did, she saw her friend pulling out of the driveway. Her daughter was right behind the car and he didn't see her. Thankfully, Grandma was there in time and screamed. He stopped the car inches away from her daughter. That is literally mother's intuition. I swear, mothers have sixth sense when it comes to their children. She literally would have been run over if it wasn't for Grandma's quick thinking. Moving on to number 3, we have the car crash. So this story was from Doozer Dude. A couple of years ago, he was getting a drive from a friend. He was in the backseat of the car and everything was going good. They were on the freeway when all of a sudden he felt super nervous. Out of instinct, he quickly ducked and curled into a fetal position. And good thing that he did, because a couple seconds later, they crashed into a signpost and that came through the window and landed right where his head would have been. Like, this story is insane. His body literally told him to duck. It knew what was gonna happen literally seconds before it did happen. Had he not ducked, the sign would have pierced him and he wouldn't be alive today. I'm telling you, this story just shows how complex the human body is. Like, it senses things way before they actually happen. Coming in at number 2, we have the ferry wreck. Back in the day, a woman named Eleanor, her family, and her parents' friends had plans to go abroad for a wedding. But the day before, her dad woke up from a terrible nightmare. He was absolutely terrified and shaken by it. And as a result, he told his family they weren't going to the wedding. Now, everyone was mad at him because not only did they cancel last minute, but everyone was looking forward to going. But good thing they did cancel, because that night, the ferry that they were supposed to catch sank, and 852 people passed away as a result. This happened on September 28, 1994, and is referred to as one of the worst maritime disasters of the century. On that night, the ferry hit stormy weather and the ship went down. The passengers on board were trapped inside the ship and drowned. Only 137 people survived. So this dad saved his entire family from that disaster. And in our number 1 spot, we have the party. A couple of years ago, this individual and their friends were heading to an off-campus party, but they needed someone to be the designated driver for them since they were planning on drinking. A guy they knew offered to take them as long as they gave him gas money. They really wanted to go, but all of the friends got the same bad feeling and decided it was best for them to just stay in and watch movies instead. That night, the guy offered to take a different group of people to the party, but he had some drinks at the party without telling them and drove them back home drunk. As a result, they got into a huge car crash. The girl sitting in the passenger seat lost her life. Everyone else was taken to the hospital for bad injuries. That literally could have been them. They escaped death by staying home that night.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Tucson tension. This story comes from Reddit, as many good stories do. The Redditor Jonah was talking about a drive they were doing from Tucson, Arizona to Trinity in California. Now, if anyone is familiar with this route, then they'll know that it's mainly desert, and at times it's pretty deserted. They said that they were driving on a back road when they noticed that the car was running very low on fuel. They were about to pull into a gas station, but a strange sixth sense told them that something wasn't right. They pulled their car over just ahead of the gas station so they could reconcile with their feelings for a minute. They found that there was a gas station 20 miles on and decided to risk driving that far on near empty based on the feeling they were having. As they drove ahead and looked back at the gas station that filled them with such a weird fear, they noticed that there were 10 to 15 people who hadn't been there now standing outside. They'd driven a little way down the road, but it looked as if some of these people were heavily armed too. Now, of course, they called the police, they said they never ever looked back after that. Who knows what would have happened if they'd driven into that gas station seriously.
Next up at number 9 now, we have the tornado. This is a short one that came from Reddit user Telegraph Kiss. They said, I worked at a hospital PRN and frequently picked up extra shifts. I worked overnights and had asked the supervisor to go ahead and put me down to work the next night. Well, as the night went on, I just felt awful, like completely doomed. I had never wanted so badly to be home. I lived an hour away from my job. So by the morning, I called the supervisor and asked her to remove me from the schedule. So I went home feeling unexplainably scared. By the time I woke up, I was getting calls that an EF5 tornado had hit the town I worked in and the hospital I worked at. I found that one really interesting. They say that animals can sense impending natural disasters. Do you think humans can sort of tap into that ability as well? Moving on to number 8 now, we have helping a friend. This one came from Reddit user Calamity H Jane. Their story sounds like it's come straight out of a gangster movie. Now that might sound cool, but how would you like to be in this situation? They said, a few years ago, about 1 AM on a Sunday morning, I had to take my dog out before bed. I lived in a rough neighborhood and I am a female, so I usually have my guard up regardless of the time. Before I left the apartment building, my gut told me something was up. The street was completely void of traffic and people, except for a van parked out to the side of the road. Outside of it were 3 people who I quickly identified as male. Right away, my reaction was to keep my head low, put my jacket hood up and not bring attention to myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see they were struggling. On closer inspection, I see 2 of the men are holding up the other man between them. I make the assumption that they are just headed home after a night of heavy partying and they are just helping their friend get sick or something. I am telling myself this to ease my fears. Then they notice me and they stop everything and freeze. I thought this was odd and not good, so I dragged my dog straight back to the building. I don't even know if he got the chance to pee that night. I go to bed thinking nothing more of it, until it's time to take the dog out again in the morning. There was a notice in the elevator asking for witnesses as to exactly what I saw that evening because a dead body had been found. So this wasn't a friend of theirs after all, they were ditching a body. It still upsets me to this day and I'll never ignore my intuition again. Next up at number 7 now, we have Katrina. This one came from Chanel number 5 on Reddit. This is a story that is very personal to them, but people all over the world will know what the event they're talking about is. They said, I've lived in South Louisiana my entire life, about an hour south of New Orleans. In July 2005, I was only 11 years old, I kept having this reoccurring nightmare of me lying in my backyard, staring at the sky, and suddenly a large brown wave of water, probably 30 feet high, came up and washed my entire neighborhood away. It would always end right after the wave crashed and I would wake up. Then Hurricane Katrina hit a month later. My hometown was out of power for 2 weeks, but thankfully no flooding. But then I had the same dream after Katrina hit, except I saw the aftermath. I kept seeing dead animals floating past me as I tried to swim to my house. When I woke up, I had this horrible feeling that something horrible was going to happen to us. Hurricane Rita was making landfall and we were waiting it out at my house. I kept telling my mom that I wanted to go to my aunt's house, which was in the parish north of us. She said no and told me to go back to sleep. About an hour later, the levees in my town broke and our entire town had an hour to evacuate. Most of our parish was under 6 feet of water. I lost 2 classmates and 6 family members. When we came back about a week later, everything was coated in mud. There were dozens of dead animals all over the road. Most of us were homeless for years after, but at least we were alive. So now when I tell my mom something is up, she listens. Next up at number 6 now, we have 9/10. For those of you that are old enough to remember 9/11, it was a day many people will never forget. But how many people remember the day before? I guess that would be called 9/10. One Reddit user does, and here is why. They said, true story, I was a freshman in high school when 9/11 happened and was kind of a worrywart. I'd always watch the news and read the newspapers and had a solid understanding of who Bin Laden was and what his goal was. I remember on 9/10 around 11 AM I got a really bad feeling in my mind and went to the nurse's office. I called my mom and told her I wasn't feeling well and needed to get sent home from school. She was busy working and couldn't come get me, but said she would ask my grandfather if he could. He agreed and showed up within 30 minutes. When I got into his car, he looked at me and said, you look fine. We talked for a good portion of the ride home, and at some point I remember saying to him I thought tomorrow was going to be the day the world ended. I believed wholeheartedly we were going to be attacked on a massive scale. I'm talking nukes and all of that. Obviously it wasn't that drastic, but still the next day was 9/11, and I'll never forget the feeling in my stomach during third period when my principal pulled my teacher from the classroom and she came back in and turned the TV on to see the first tower smoking. Haunting. Moving on to number 5 now, we have The Snatcher. This one comes from Reddit user Apple Bliss. Great name. They share a story that is every parent's worst nightmare, but luckily kids can sometimes have a strange intuition. Apple Bliss said, I think a gut feeling led to me not being kidnapped. I was maybe 9 at the time. I was in a department store wandering on my own when all of a sudden the most terrible gut-wrenching feeling came over me. I don't know how, but I knew I had to get back to my mom. I ran to the aisle she was in. A man hurriedly followed me into the aisle. When he saw I was with my mother, he stood there for a few seconds and stared at me before walking away. I will never forget that feeling or his terrifying face. Moving on to number 4 now, we have The Warning. This one came from Reddit user Belosi Dapper. I think this one would be scary just by itself, but the gut feeling makes it even better. They said when I was about 12 years old, I had a nightmare one night that I could see my identical twin sister standing outside of the porch, waving her arms at me as if to dissuade me from coming outside. She looked dead and was lit up by this eerie green light. It was so scary that I can still see it vividly in my mind today. When I woke up, my heart was thudding in my chest. Normally when I had a nightmare, and I often did as a kid, I would go wake up my stepmom who would take me downstairs and make me some cocoa, and we would sit at the kitchen table and talk about it until I felt better. That night, for some reason, I stayed put in my bed and couldn't bring myself to wake her up. The next morning we were awoken to shouting downstairs. A man who was drunk or stoned or something had broken into our back porch. The porch connected to the kitchen where I would have been with my stepmom. He stripped down naked inside the porch, messed with some of my dad's tools, and then at daybreak had gone outside when he heard our neighbor lady hauling her trash to the curb. She thought it was my father and had called out to him, at which point he'd gone after her. Police were called and he was taken away. There were all kinds of hunting supplies, tools on that back porch, including a hatchet. I shudder to think what would have happened if we'd wandered downstairs in our nightgowns and he'd been just on the other side of a pane of glass. Thanks sis. Next up, number 3 now, we have hanging knives. This one comes from Reddit user Deacon Nunu, who said he used to work as a security guard at a dormitory that used to be an old hotel. He prided himself on going down every dark hallway alone and leaving no stone unturned. He said, one night I got to the double doors that went to a particularly dark hallway leading to the back entrance to the kitchen and I froze. No, I said to myself, I'm not going down there tonight. This was extremely out of character for me. I had no idea what would cause me to all of a sudden have so strong an urge to stay out of there, but it was like really strong, so I went with my gut. I was kind of embarrassed about it and didn't tell anyone. That night, at that exact same time, there was a strung out addict robbing the kitchen, and there were really sharp, gigantic cheese knives hanging all over the place, just in case he didn't have his own weapon. I'm pretty sure he would have attacked me as the only witness had I gone down there that night. Who knows who would have come out on top, but I like to think that something saved me that night. But if it was my subconscious, how did it assess that there was someone down there before I even opened up the doors? Moving on to number 2 now, we have the detector. This one comes from Roscoe Cracks Corn, and it's a reminder that you should always check your smoke detector. Seriously, like after this video, go and check yours, or ask your parents to. This story is a good reminder why. They said, I was driving home from work one afternoon and was troubled by the thought it would be horrible if I turned the corner and found my house was on fire. I got home and my house was fine, but that afternoon I thought I need to check the smoke detector. I'd moved in a year and a half before and hadn't ever checked the smoke detector. I bought a couple of batteries a few days later with the intention of putting them in, but noticed the detector looked different than the usual battery operated ones I was accustomed to seeing. I didn't get around to actually checking it though. I mentioned it to my friend who said he'd get a ladder and help me check it. We didn't get round to that either. A few days later, I was awakened by my smoke detector at 4 a.m. My house was burning. I got my kids out and my parrot with only my bathrobe on. It turned out that my smoke detector was hardwired. I'm alive only because of that. It was arson as well. No one was ever arrested. And finally, number 1 now, we have name and birthday. I had to put this story at the number 1 spot because it's scary, but also I have so much respect for the storyteller and their friend. You're about to see why. Their Reddit username is gmoney5786. They said, when I was in university, I was walking home from the bars in the Bywood Market in Ottawa with my roommate at the time. It was about 2:30 a.m. and we were looking forward to getting home and ordering some pizza when we came across 2 guys and a very drunk girl. Initially, we didn't think anything about it because it was a pretty common sight on a Friday, but as we walked behind them for a few minutes, we noticed how out of it she was. One of the guys was essentially carrying her and her clutch bag was loosely dangling from her limp wrist. Our street came up, but instead of turning down it, we decided to see what was going on. The guys explained that she was one of their girlfriends and had too much to drink, so they were taking her home. We asked them a few more questions: what bar they were at, where she lived, if she was an Ottawa University student, etc. They gave pretty convincing answers, but all seemed very uncomfortable and wanted us to go away. During the conversation, the guy holding his girlfriend shifted her position to get a better grip, which caused her arm to dangle down and drop her clutch. Before they could move, my roommate grabbed the clutch and took her ID. My roommate then asked if they knew her first and last name along with her birthday. This is where things changed. The other guy got really aggressive and confrontational, while the other went silent. They didn't know her name or her birthday. I then pulled out my phone and called the police. The guy dropped her and they took off running. We waited with her for about 10 minutes until the police and EMS got there. We gave a statement but did not have much to go on other than their descriptions. Police told us they suspected she had been dosed and that she was lucky we happened to be walking behind her. Pretty scary stuff.
Starting off this countdown, we have the robbery. This story was posted by user Magana. When she was younger, she was at a pet store with her sister. That's when a man walked in and she claims she felt like the air in the store changed. She got a sick feeling deep in her core. She didn't know what was up, but she grabbed her sister and they fled across the street to the grocery store where their mom was. They all stayed together and finished their shopping. When they left the store, they noticed that the pet store they were just in was flooded with police officers. Turns out that as soon as they left the store, that very man that she had a bad feeling about tried to rob the place and shot the cashier. That feeling she got saved her and her sister's lives.
Coming into number 9, we have the Night's Watchman. Aren't dogs great? There really is no other answer than yes here. This dog, however, had a strange nighttime ritual that made his owners think that he may have a sixth sense. It seems that the fluffster took the witching hour very seriously. Every night at 3 a.m. he would get up and routinely inspect all of the rooms in the house. 3 a.m. on the dot. For this reason, his owners would leave all of the doors open, if not he would get restless and bark. After going from room to room, he would sleep in front of the bedroom door. If ever he was caught in the act of his routine inspection, he would look at a person, then seemingly at the empty doorway and back again. It's almost like he could see something that us humans simply couldn't. What sixth sense wakes him up like clockwork? His owners don't know. What he's looking for? Well, maybe it's a good thing that dogs can't talk, because we might not want to know the answer. Coming into number 8, we have the policeman's power. Some people find themselves drawn to law enforcement as they seemingly have a sixth sense as to how to spot bad people. This story comes from Officer Brandon Smithley, a military veteran turned law enforcement officer. He describes how a gut feeling led him to stop a bad man. He said he was sitting roadside in St. Louis performing traffic spot checks when a pedestrian caught his eye. He was carrying a backpack and the officer said he had a very bad vibe. He decided to step out of the patrol vehicle and stop the guy. When he stopped him, he was met with the usual "who, me?" response. The officer said that he felt a deep sinking feeling that something was very wrong. Officer Smithley said that with every question, the guy would clutch his backpack even tighter. The officer asked to look in the bag. What he saw shocked him. It seems the man was carrying a hammer, a screwdriver, 2 knives, 4 lengths of rope, rubber bands, 2 Molotov cocktails, and a lighter. It seems that the man was actually on his way to murder his pregnant ex-girlfriend and then set fire to her home. The officer in question has said since he has always trusted his gut. Coming into number 7, we have a wife's wisdom. This is the story of a woman in Utah who saved her husband's life with a strange sense of matrimonial intuition. Nicole Matthew was at work when she had a strange feeling that she needed to rush back home. Meanwhile, her husband Scott had been working on his truck when the jack slipped and fell, trapping him and slowly crushing him under a vehicle. Stuck for half an hour and knowing he would die if help didn't come soon, he willed his wife to come home. Perhaps the pair have a psychic connection. Perhaps Nicole has a sixth sense. Whatever she felt, he was in trouble. She rushed to him, found him in the garage, and found him pinned underneath his car, barely able to breathe. She called 911. He had suffered 6 broken ribs, but thankfully, as his wife found him in time, Scott, a father of 5, lived to tell the tale. Not so much a scary story up next, but a truly awesome fact about humans, and maybe confirmation that we do have a sixth sense at number 6. We can hear water temperature. Have a listen to this excerpt from Tom Scott's video and see how well your sixth sense is working. Which of these pours do you think is hot or cold? Alright, did you get that? So the first one was cold and the second one was hot. Now humans are supposed to be able to hear this. Listen again and see if you can hear it if you didn't pick up it on the first time. The human brain is in tune to more than we think, which actually makes this list even scarier because maybe these sixth senses are real. Coming into number 5, we have the twin bond. It is often discussed how twins have a sixth sense, and there are countless spooky tales out there. Today I am sharing the story of Leanne and Gemma Houghton. At the time of the incident, the girls were 15 and living in Manchester, England. Gemma said that she simply had a feeling that her sister needed help. Her sister was in the bathroom and usually, as teenage girls, they respected one another's privacy, but the feeling was so strong that she bounded in anyway. She said at first that she thought her sister was playing a trick on her in the bath, but then she realized she was drowning. Luckily, she knew CPR, so she rescued her from the water and was able to block her airways. The emergency services said that if Gemma hadn't had her sixth sense feeling, her sister would have died. Meet the real-life Cole Sear at number 4. Cole Sear was the kid character in The Sixth Sense who famously saw dead people. Well, this kid is called Elijah and he has terrifying psychic powers. Elijah correctly predicted his mother's miscarriage. He touched her pregnant belly and said, "Mummy, your baby is going to go with God." Terrifying. Sadly, she did miscarry a couple of days later. He also accurately predicted that later she would have twin boys, which she did. When his mother Heather took him to see a psychic expert, the expert confirmed that the 4-year-old boy speaks to dead people and higher powers. Similarly, at number 3, we have the dead animal whisperer. 28-year-old Laura Kemp has had the ability to speak to dead people and animals since she was 3 years old. She said the first ghost she met was her Uncle John when she was a toddler, and that she is often visited by her dead Nana, who shares her loving memories with her. She says that she can even remember her parents' wedding, which happened long before she was born. The mother from Greater Manchester says that she has met dozens of ghosts, but more often she meets the spirit of dead animals. She even claims to have met a dead bear. What the bear was doing in Manchester, we may never know. She also says that her sixth sense gives her the ability to sense people's emotions before she even sees them. Now it seems that the gift does run in the family and that her daughter is also able to see spirits. Coming into number 2, this is a very sad story. We have the pilot's plight. American Airlines Flight 191 is the worst airline crash in US history. It killed all 271 people on board and 2 people on the ground. Shortly after the takeoff from Chicago's O'Hare Airport, the plane's left engine separated, causing the plane to leak hydraulic fluid and crash. Now it seems that the plane's captain David Booth had regular dreams about the plane flipping off the runway and bursting into flames for 10 days before the incident. He told officials, but they wrote off his sixth sense as a series of bad dreams. Finally, coming into number 1, this is so spooky. We have Sharon Sharon Tate's premonition. The Charles Manson murders were truly disturbing, and they deeply troubled Americans in the 1960s when the news broke. Manson's cult famously killed actress Sharon Tate and her ex-boyfriend and continued friend Jay Sebring. They also killed her unborn baby and 2 of her friends. Now, 2 years prior to the incident, when Tate was still with her ex, she dreamed about the pair being murdered by being cut open. It was horrifying. She even spoke in an interview with a magazine about it. 2 years later, she was married to someone else and 2 weeks away from birthing her child when she was hanging out with her friends, including her ex. In eerily similar circumstances to her dream, she and Sebring were indeed savagely killed. Now, it sounds like Tate had a scary sixth sense, but it didn't save her.